All right, I'm Alvin Bedingfield. I work for EAB, one of the project managers on the TAB professional side. We'll go through a collaboration through the TAB process on a project that was a little bit more challenging due to some of the features put into it. But going through disadvantages and advantages of trying to collaborate with the general contractor, owners, and team to just try to make a more successful project. So first we'll say don't forget to check in to get your credits. And we're going to go through a couple learning objectives. It's importance of collaborating with the general contractor, trying to make the job go a little bit smoother so that avoid rework from all the parties in it. Understand the importance of site visits, how they're beneficial to the project to avoid any potential delays that can happen at the project. And then understanding challenges associated with performing TAB on certain projects with certain elevation changes and kind of unique. And then just to gain an understanding on proper measurements and how we establish some of the airflows at the project while we were going through it. So understanding the importance of collaborating on the job, obviously quality assurance, it's proper installation of sensors. Oh, I skipped the page, sorry. Enhanced project planning, ensuring the TAB on the schedule. We want to make sure that we're on schedule. A lot of the times we get to the schedule with the general contractor and it's TAB's 2-day process. And we have it signed for 4 to 6 weeks. The general thinks it's 2 weeks or 2 days. And that's just trying to help guide the project to make it transparent. Like, we're going to be there longer than you think. If you're planning your substantial completion is this date, you got to put us on the schedule correctly. And that's just unknown to some general contractors. And it's established in trade partner durations too. And just planning ahead. There's times where the controls contractor might require a network drop, and it's to the point, does he want to bring a cell router? Does he have a cell router on the bid? And just trying to plan for some of those duration changes, because if we're relying on a web-based server and he doesn't have the network coming in until June and he's supposed to be done in April, it's something we need to make a couple changes to the project to move forward with it. And then optimizing system performance, trying to identify conflicts that we might come across throughout the process. Is there a high ceiling that we need to get into? Are they putting hardwood floors down? When are they putting the floors down? We want to be able to try to get into these areas to balance properly, just so that way we're not hindering any performance later on. It's just ensuring access to the dampers, access to the equipment. If there's any elevation changes that we need a lift for, and just trying to make sure that we don't lose any of the performance quality of the job, and trying to work through it with the team so we can all plan ahead. And then ensuring quality performance or quality assurance and compliance. It's proper installation of sensors. There's a lot of times where I'm trying to work with the controls contractor early in the project and say, we got a couple typical units. Let's install the sensors on this one unit first. We'll look at it together. We'll determine if the sensors are correct, if they're not. And then if they are, then we can copy and paste and go through all the sensors so we're not writing up 30 air handlers of the same issue. Let's look through one typical type of system and make sure, hey, these sensors need to be changed. This one doesn't serpentine across the coil correctly. Let's address this issue and then use it for the rest of them. But trying to reach out to the controls contractor, like, I don't want you to do things twice. Let's try to make sure that everything's in there correctly the first time so we can just use that similar template of a mock-up and try to keep going with it through the rest of the project. And then trying to identify any spec deviations that the contractor might not understand, using the wrong sensor, and trying to establish all those possibilities first just to make sure he's not reworking anything. And then risk mitigation is identifying risks or issues early, trying to figure out things that can cause damage to the equipment later on. If we're walking by on an observation, or if we're there, do we hear a fan starting to rub a shroud that needs to be maybe addressed immediately to the mechanical contractor? Are the pumps rotating backwards? Are the fans rotating backwards? And then are they running the air handlers just to try to cool the space because they need to put finishes in and the high statics aren't in on an air handler, and we risk damaging ductwork? Anything like that throughout the system. We want to make sure that even through the construction process, we're still taking the integrity of the equipment without hindering the maintenance department dealing with extra issues later on as far as leaky ductwork, because they wanted to cool the area and we were running these things with no statics, and we were running them at 6 to 7 inches of static just because the general wants to cool the space for architectural and finishes so he can dry it out so he can put tile in. And then going through with knowledge transfer. Obviously, as tab agents and tab professionals and CX, we have a knowledge of systems that we've learned throughout the process. We've lessons learned. We know things that worked on the problems and failured on a project, and trying to establish some of these possible problems that we came across the first time. Like, we've failed on this project because this is how we did it. Let's try not to fail another time, and just use that lessons learned. And support stuff that we have that the general contractor doesn't know. I get asked a lot by the general contractor, I don't know where my controls is at. Can you do a quick walk and just tell me where his panels are? Because he doesn't understand that. It's something that they can't see. They know when the mechanical's in there, we know the ductwork's done. We know the damper's in. But where are the controls? They don't have access to establish where the controls are at. Is it up and running? I mean, a lot of times the general contractor tells me, I opened up the panel, and if it looks done, I think it's ready for you. I'm like, no, but I'll take my opportunity to take a look at it for him, just to try to push the process. Like, they're falling behind on these two things. Let's try to get that buttoned up so we can get started. And then streamlining communication at the project. Obviously, this allows quick ways to address concerns on the project. The more we communicate with all parties on it and trying to make a huge communication chain, we're utilizing better resources. We've had problems on a couple projects where I've had it, where the chiller manufacturers came out to the project and he's trying to start it up. He's like, I'm running into an issue. I can't get it started. So the engineers called me because, hey, can you go to put a meter on it? Let's try to figure out why that chiller won't start up. He's getting flow, he's losing flow, and we just don't understand it. Can you get an ultrasonic on the pipe so we can try to figure out a way to figure out why we're having issues with these chillers? And then properly adjusting our schedules. It comes also to the point, as long as we're all on the same page and the general contractor wants to put sealant in this area, but the hardwood floor is being finished, or the hardwood floor is fixing to get put in, well, let's try to communicate so we're all on the same page, so I can adjust the task. I might be working on this area of the building, but if you want to try to put the tile in and put the flooring down, well, let me know. So that way I can adjust my team to move it. As long as we're all on the same page and we all understand the schedule moving forward, it's always going to help out the project completely throughout the process. And then we're going to go through a couple of disadvantages of not collaborating, obviously. It's to go to the opposite direction. Misalignment of goals. I mean, that's a big one. Typically, we get to the end of the project, and it's like, I got to get fire marshal in. We're going to white out the ceiling. Like, that's my first concern, is just, let's white out the ceiling. Let's get that taken care of. And that's just, the goals shifted. We went from a collaboration process of we're trying to work together to now, I got to get in my building. I got to get whited out to make it look finished for the owner. And that changes durations of stuff. There might be a area of the building where we agreed at the beginning, like, we're not going to put tile in, we'll let you get in there, balance the terminal units, and then suddenly, I'm going to white it out. And then my task duration went from a 2-week process now to a month process, because now we're going throughout the process, pop in more tiles to try to find the dampers, look through systems systematically. And it's once you start looking at your own goals and not working as the process, we're all in there for the same reason, is to turn over a successful project to the owner at their interest. And once you start shifting into your own priority, it kind of gets the whole project off track. And then inefficient communication, it's always going to hinder a project. If we're not talking, I've at least talked to every project I've won. I've tried to talk to the entire team at least once or twice a week, just to try to figure out, hey, are we on the same page? Are we still working out together? But it comes into it might be a print change or a ductwork change that had to happen because the existing conditions of the space didn't allow a certain size duct. And that hinders it on certain aspects because on one project we did, due to the smaller mechanic rooms, the mechanical contractor had to change the size of the outside air duct. Well, when the controls contractor sized all the flow stations for the prints, and they didn't get notified that happened, all the flow stations came in. Well, now the flow stations don't fit because it was a 20 by 20 duct, and they changed it to a 20 by 14. So now all your flow stations didn't fit into the duct. So now we have a 4 to 6 week delay waiting on flow stations to come in. And that streamlined communication of saying we have to make modifications, you might want to plan ahead, would help the project and not put an extra month delay on a project. And then delayed timelines. One, engaging late on the project is always going to, engaging late is always going to push services back. The more we delay the timelines, and it's going to be in a domino effect. Once we get behind, commission's going to be behind, substantial completion's going to get behind, and it just works one after the other. So going back into the flow stations. So if we were supposed to start in May and the controls contractor didn't realize that the ductwork changed, well, now we're starting in June. That means we're going to go through our process 4 to 6 weeks, and if the commission representative was thinking that he would start in June, now he's starting in July, and we're getting further and further throughout the process. And anytime there's a hiccup in the process, we just domino effect all the way down, one after the next. And there's a hard way of trying to catch that time back up, and just it further delays the project. And then not collaborating also causes increased cost. It might be a minor issue that might manifest into a larger issue. It's the rework. It's sensors not installed correctly that they have to pull out and replace the whole entire sensor and put it in if it wasn't to spec. It could be a reconfiguration of the piping. Anything that we can try to collaborate the better and catch early why it's being installed, and that I'll go into that next with the observation walks, is trying to snapshot a project and not increase the cost overall, because no one wants to plan for something and then make it cost twice as much throughout the process. But a lot of the times it's just removal of the sensors and reinstallation or ductwork configurations that the mechanical contractor misinterpreted on the prints. And going back into our expertise, that's stuff that we can see and go through the lessons learned and try to help mitigate some of that lost time from everybody, because we're all here to try to finish the project together. And then compromising system performance, that goes into throughout the process. It might be where, and typical on projects, especially even with the hydronic piping, I try to walk the project earlier. I try to actually reach out to the controls contractor and say, hey, while we're here, let's walk the piping. Let's spot your wells, because they're 75% done with the piping. Let's do that now so we can get the 2/3 sensors of the water inside the building. Like, we don't want to be close to the close to the pumps, because it's not going to be an accurate measurement when the sensor's close to the pumps. So trying to reach out to the contractors and say, I'm trying to help you with the service. Let's know that earlier in the process, if we can get the wells and the DP sensors in the building, and trying to just work together as a team. And without the collaboration, when they just, oh, I'm going to put them in the plant. Well, we're going to compromise the performance overall of the system. And not allowing proper balance in time. Going into the project, it might be, well, the ceiling's getting put in, and then we're using high lifts and trying to get into some of these areas, or they're putting down the hardwood floors, and we got to get in there with plywood. Anything that we can't properly have the time to balance could hinder the system overall. And it could be the same thing as on a larger system, not having the proper branch dampers in, and trying to reach out early, saying, hey, you're missing branch dampers. They don't always get put in, and we'll have to end up cutting diffusers further, which we create some velocity noise if we're trying to, rather than cutting the branch and trying to cut it before it gets into the branch downstream. Like, if we can correlate that early with the team, we won't have a compromised system throughout the process. And then limits problem-solving capabilities. The more we don't communicate, we have the less time. It's more reactive at that point. It comes down to a problem where an issue has occurred, but if we were communicating the whole time, then we know the problem's there. We know that we can try to mitigate the problem, and it's not a reactive process. It's going to be proactive, where we can move forward throughout the process, and we can fix the issue before it causes the delay. Because it's at the point we want to be a solution to the process and not a problem to the process. And then I'm going to go into on-site visits. Obviously, on-site visits, I try to be active on those. It helps evaluating the areas throughout the process. Knowing where the job is at, knowing what finishes are going in at that time. It helps determine the readiness of the project. So I know where the project's at. I know what area I can move into. Potentially identifying some of the issues. It might be the way they're routing the ductwork. It might be the way they're installing the dampers, or the way controls is installing sensors. Trying to catch that early is always something we can catch on an observation walk. A lot of the times it's reviewing the hydronic pipe, and I'll go back into this 2/3 sensors. Catching those early involves a better process overall, because a lot of times once they fill the pipe up and they're like, we're not going to drain it out, we're not going to lose chemicals, it is what it is, we're kind of in there. And trying to knowing where the pipe is at and knowing what stage of the process is at is always going to be a beneficial part of the site walk. And then just coordinate with trades. At that point, we know where the process is. We know where the air handlers are going in, and just trying to get a snapshot of it mentally, where the project is, to try to actively plan our durations. And then we'll go into identifying some issues. Well, obviously, when we did site walks, it could be the flexes on a bunch of the diffusers is not ideal. Possible restrictions. We came across times where the air handler was shipped and they didn't even put the panel in between the hot deck and cold deck, and trying to catch those issues earlier, so the mechanical contractor says, I don't know how they got shipped like that, but let me order that panel so we don't, because we're not going to be able to temper that area to put the finishes in. And then trying to catch dampers earlier on high ceilings, because obviously if the ductwork drops, they're immediate, put the damper high, or they're going to put it right at the flex, and trying to catch that on a site walk where we can make sure that the damper's high, but we have the proper access to that damper. So we're not creating a velocity noise by throttling it right at the diffuser. And then just ductwork misconfigurations. I mean, there's times where it's installed per print, but it might not be ideal for the size of the flex. It might not be, the main ductwork might have been ran too close to the wall, and it's pinching the flex where we're going to get a velocity noise. Obviously, the one is the ductwork is directly above the return air. So that was something that they just had to completely cut out that whole top plenum, just to try to not create a restriction on the inlet of the unit. Oh, then we got an automation. And then it goes into trying to catch test ports. Obviously, anything that they can put into the piping while the piping's still dry. and before it gets pressurized with water and stuff. And as I said, going into incorrect sensors, it might have said it had been a 24-inch serpentine, and they decided to use an 8-inch probe, and the discharge area sensor is not even inside the coil string or coil path. And then going into the other one is obviously an example of when I worked at a project where we walked with the controls contractor, and I marked on the prints saying this is where we suggested the sensors are going. Let's get the mechanical contractor to put the wells in, and then request the same with our test ports, just to try to make sure we have the ability to accurately calibrate that sensor too, but making sure it's 2/3 of the system in stream. And then we'll go into some of the challenges that we face when we balance that performance arts building. So obviously, height and elevation changes are always going to be involved with visual arts. Elevations of the equipment, ductwork, high ceilings made it very difficult to balance. So on this project, the front of the building, from the front seats, was 60 foot from the floor to the damper. So through that process, they used 3 sets of scaffolding. So we had 3 40-foot tall sections of scaffolding. And then on top of that, just to balance the grills properly, we used anywhere between, I think, a 6-foot, an 8-foot, 12-foot ladder. And then we also utilized sections of rolling scaffold. And that goes back into the coordination process, because during the process, we were coordinating with the general contractor. Hey, they had the scaffold on the lower scaffold, so we had to call their competent person to come and break down the scaffold, move it to the next scaffold, build it back up so we can get to the dampers. But we had to utilize, on top of the 40-foot fixed scaffold, we had to use 15 to 25-foot rolling scaffolds to try to access the dampers to properly proportion them and to measure them. And then going into some of the unique features of the visual arts is trying to coordinate with the certain trades, because I might need the wall paneling installed to measure the diffusers, but I don't need them to put the slats in the lay-in side of it. Because once on that layer, we had the manual of the dampers above the acoustical ceiling, then we had the slats, which the grills fit into, and then we had the wall paneling. And what we're trying to do is coordinate with the team. I need the wall panelings put in on the side so we can measure these diffusers, but I don't want you to put the slats in, because once you put the acoustical tiling in and then the slats, then I'm not going to be able to access the dampers. So trying to coordinate directly with those specific trades and the general contractor, we're able to get through those that main corridor. And that was just because we tried to plan ahead and say, I need this, not this. Let's try to coordinate your schedules so that way we can properly balance that area. And then integration with aesthetics and features. Obviously, a lot of the architects put a lot of unique features in. They don't always help the balance inside of it. So on this ceiling in general, it was a very nice ceiling when it was all put in, but trying to coordinate this earlier was the process. So this ceiling from the one end of the corridor to the other end of the corridor is 140-foot atrium. It's a tongue and groove ceiling. So that whole ceiling is one after the next. So trying to coordinate that with the GC and tell him the problems of what could possibly happen and trying to go through. So I reached out to him and told him, hey, you got, what was it? You got 52 linear slot diffusers in that system. That's 52 young regulators. We all know young regulators don't always get properly installed. So going through with them and saying, here's your possible cause. If any of those are broken, the whole ceiling has to come back down. And every single panel, since the building's cut at an angle, are custom cut. So if that architectural feature is nice, but if we don't get ahead and visually check each set of dampers prior, then you're going to have to take your whole ceiling down. And that's not what you want to do. So we stopped what they were doing. We went through and checked each single diffuser prior, open, close with the hood, make sure they all worked, and then said, okay, now you can continue with your ceiling. Because we just didn't want the end of the process, because I don't want to see anybody have to do the rework and take down their whole entire ceiling, because 140-foot tongue and groove ceiling would not be fun. And then obstructions with visual arts, a lot of it's obviously, main ones that we saw was a lot of electrical, just covering up the diffusers. But there's always the architectural features where, like, as I said on that one slide, I would prefer not to have those slats in, because we can't put the hood on them. Like, once they start putting all those architectural features, there's a different means and methods that we have to go through. And the easiest process is just holding up a trade real quick just to try to get those accurate readings before we did it. And then obviously maintenance and serviceability. Obviously, we're the eyes and ears for the maintenance team and the engineers, and there might be an architectural feature that the engineer didn't pick up, and trying to catch some of these accessibility issues for maintenance. So they're the ones that have to buy the building in the long run and work on the building, and trying to make sure that they have the proper access to all of their parts is just more beneficial overall in the process. And on these, we tried to point it out earlier, and they actually ended up, sadly enough, it has to be the rework, because they had to actually, per the engineer, all that electrical piping had to be redone. They had to cut it, pull it, and reroute it. And if being in the visual arts is a lot of sound, visual, lighting features and stuff like that, and it was just inconvenient for everybody at that point. But trying to catch it earlier before that sheetrock went in, because that sheetrock, it was over that ceiling also, was double-layered sound sheetrock. So it was just trying to avoid that coming back out just to get back up in there. And then our going into our measurement process of some of these. So obviously, we're going through the elevation changes. So the entire auditorium is one air handler. It's one single zone unit. There's another air handler that serves the two balconies, the lower balconies. The main auditorium is one single zone air handler. So from the grill to the user on each space was, in the front of the auditorium was 55 foot, and then the back of the auditorium, it was on the same system, was 9 to 15 foot on that back balcony. So obviously, that's something we wanted to prioritize with the balance, and obviously, when the scaffolding's in there, it's a lot easier to balance. Once the scaffolding gets out, there's no way of going back in there. So when we initially read out the building, the back areas, obviously, on a single zone unit, all the air goes to the back and push it back to the front. So the back three branches were anywhere between 750 to 800 CFM out of 500. So we're sitting at about 160 to 165% of design in the back, which is the closest to the user. So that's the 10 foot above the ceiling. And then the front three, we were anywhere between 230 to 260. So we're about 40% of design, which is the 55-foot drop. So trying to make sure that that area was properly balanced early was crucial to us throughout the process, because there's no way getting back to that auditorium. There's no way getting back to those grills, because we're utilizing multiple scaffolds just to get to those areas. So going through that with our team and systematically trying to push the air. And I also couldn't catch on it, but there's also two diffusers that serve the orchestra pit, because the front stage on that visual arts building drops. So they can use it as a full stage, or it can drop for the orchestra pit. But those were just as bad. And knowing that if we can't get back to actually push all that air back to the front of that auditorium, we'd always have cold spots in the back. Because on top of that, there was this, one of the thermometers for the thermostats for the visual arts was on that third floor balcony, then one was on the first floor, and they averaged between the two. But just knowing that all that air ran to the back of that auditorium, and we're that high, we'd have constant temperature issues. So proving that we were able to get into that area and trying to make sure it was properly balanced and make sure we knew where our airflow was a main part of that process. So throughout the process of that, we took multiple AKs, multiple correction factors on our hoods, trying to just make sure that we knew our correction factors, we knew where our airflow was. So measuring each grill, then traversing each branch just to make sure our established was it, because we used the hood as just the proportion device, and obviously we had to know where our zone was in general. So just making sure I knew where my air was the highest priority of that project. Because as I said, once they put that ceiling tile, or once they take that scaffolding out, there was no way to get back to balance it. And then obviously another portion of that auditorium was the two balconies. That was another area where, just because of the system effect, the way the ductwork was, the lower balcony was again about 40% of design, and then the top balcony was 170% of design. And the problem was I think it was about a 10-foot ceiling between the lower balcony, and then obviously on the top balcony it was literally 6 foot. You can reach up and just touch the grills. And knowing that those were 170% of design was crucial to try to go through those and try to push it down without creating a velocity noise, because obviously it's visual arts, and the highest priority of the visual arts building is to make sure that it sounds quiet and they don't pick up any noise for the performance, because they utilize this center as a UIL rated facility. But just systematically trying to go through it and knowing that, okay, we have system effect, let's try to get this proportion properly and go down and push it. So obviously it was the team, we went through and made multiple proportions to try to push it, just to try to reduce the noise of it. It was a very complex situation, because also on the original part of that was also part of the concern is since it was sound sheetrock, we missed a collaboration session on that, because originally we walked every diffuser, opened and closed the dampers, made sure that they all worked, and then there was a design change where the front of the auditorium where the stairs was, you were able to walk down and touch the sheetrock, so they actually cut it up. By doing that, they broke half the young regulators. So we had to actually keep going back and forth, and they actually had to cut sections of the sound sheetrock out to fix the young regulators and then patch them, just to try to get in there. But we try to help with the collaboration process of trying to get in there early and go from there. But I think I talked too fast, so I'm sorry. So I think I'm pretty much there. So are there any questions? Yes, sir.
You bring up a lot of great ones. For me, some of these issues with collaboration, they come in levels. So levels, the top level being like, these are things that absolutely can sink a project at the end. You touched on one of them for sure with the network drops.
Yes.
A lot of times those are coordinated by an owner or some IT professional that's absolutely on his own schedule. So, and I know what you're driving at when you say that. So we've got to get the network drops and get controls hooked up. You might have a substantial completion date of May 1st, and it's not uncommon at all. So we have our IT guy, and he's only available July 31st.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing anyone can do. So then what happens? You have controls trying to finish their work, tab trying to make the building work, and commissioning trying to validate the building works, all on a $500 laptop that just got put in. So those things come. That's when like the schedule's gone at that point.
Yeah.
The other one, it applies to a job like this, and certainly applies to anything with ducted return, stuff leakage.
Mm-hmm.
Who's managing that, and who's witnessing it, who's actually doing it, and who's making sure it gets done.
Yeah.
And because when you find duct leakage, especially on a project like this, late in the game, it's over.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do.
And on top of that, with this one we had, so when we originally traversed the auditorium unit, we were off. Like we were, from each branch that we traversed to the main duct, we had a 15% discrepancy. We kind of were confused of how that area got that discrepancy. So we actually took a thermal gun and actually walked the ductwork to try to figure out where the hot spots were. And we found seams and where the mechanical contractor had to go back and reseal them. They actually sent a guy crawl through the duct just to try to seal it from the inside, because he's like, there's no way. The ductwork's 45 foot from the lay-in ceiling.
Yeah, and you've got that architectural ceiling on top of that. So
Yeah.
that's the point I'm making, is that you probably got lucky there, because if you're a week from turnover and you're having a sealed duct, and heaven forbid it starts pressure critical areas.
Yeah.
Now you're in big trouble.
Yeah, that was the point. I walked that project because I knew that one was going to have complete elevation changes and complexity of that systems. I walked it when they were still hanging the steel of that job to try to figure out where the ductwork runs were going to be, just to make sure that I saw any obstacles earlier in that project. But going into the network job, it comes into it where certain controls contractors all have a different way of means and methods, right? A lot of them are going to a web-based, and that's one of our crucial. It goes into our remodels too, even the retrofits or renovations. Some of the districts we work in, the moment that teacher leaves, every single data rack's gone. They're like, we're not going to let any contractors in with our data racks. So they pull every single server switch out. They pull all the racks out and say, okay, well, call us back. And they don't show back up till middle of August, about when the teachers are coming back. The teachers sometimes are starting there when they don't even have the server racks in. So on a web-based control software, what do? We're to the point where, are we at the realm of the IT team, or are they going to go into a cell router to try to help with the cell router?
Take it a step further, you've got a lot of times, as staff professionals, we have to go in and check every point from like a system tree, like, in what I call it the back mask of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And the graphics, we all know, are getting built on the fly as the project's getting installed. So when the graphics go in for commissioning, that point may not work. It may not even be mapped back if it even exists at all.
Yeah.
So that's another big pinch point or bottleneck.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. But it's going into the duct leakage. That was something we kind of prioritized. And mainly it was on the supply side first because it's easier. Drive the valve 100% open for the hot water side and walk in the auditorium and try to find where the hot spots are. Because obviously if we know that there's a deviation from our traverse to the branches, then or the diffusers, then we know that there's areas. Because obviously it's double-walled exposed ductwork. They're not insulating that because it's not visual appealing, even though it's way up there and no one's gonna ever see it because it's painted black. But it was trying to find those hot spots because leakage on a system that large and that much turns and the height of it was something we had to try to snapshot early because we will never get we want to make sure, one, the airflow is always in the auditorium, but two, it was trying to figure out and mitigate that possibility of not having the airflow into the area. Any other questions? Well, that's all I have for y'all today. I'm sorry I talked too fast. I get nervous. This is my first time, so I'm going through it. So, appreciate it.